Welcome to City Church's On Demand Messages. My name is Josh, and we're so glad you're tuning in whenever and wherever you're tuning in from. In fact, if it's your first time, we'd love to connect with you. You can text NEW to the number on the screen right now. We've got a free gift for you. Also, if you need prayer, we would love to pray with you. We believe that prayer is not our last resort, but it is our first response to what is going on in our lives and the lives of those around us. And so we'd love to join in with you. And so you can text next to the number on the screen. Also, if you'd like to invest financially into the mission of City Church to be a Jesus movement that awakens the soul in the city, you can text next as well to the number on the screen. We believe every Sunday morning when we gather in person and online, and we open up God's Word, that He has something special and specific for every one of us. And so as we lean into this week's message that you're about to watch, we pray that God opens up your heart to whatever He has for you, and we hope that you are encouraged by today's message. Again, if we can do anything for you, please let us know. Hey, again, Family Sunday is blending, taking what you guys do and what we do, and so today we thought we would just kind of pick up at the end of your series that you've been teaching on Sunday mornings. And so kind of walk us through where you've been and what you guys have been talking about.
Yeah, so this whole school year, so since August, we have been on a journey walking through the entire Bible. Yeah. So from August to August, your kids on a Sunday will have walked through the entire Bible. Yeah. And so right now we're in the Old Testament, and our series is talking about having courage. So their memory verse for this month is in Joshua, where he's telling them to be courageous and not afraid because God is with them. So that's kind of what we've been walking through the whole month of November. Teaching them that they can do things even if others are afraid.
I love it. So just idea of courage. And so today, the Bible story is actually the story of Esther. Yep. And so we're going to kind of use a little bit from what city kids would experience and a little bit from what adults would experience as well.
Yep.
But over the last few months, you guys have introduced a new kind of video teaching, right?
Yeah, so we have a brand new video teaching that our kids have come to love. It's called Story Lab. So usually on a Sunday morning on the Story Lab, they would do like an experiment of some kind and then walk through the Bible story. So the Story Lab is just a little bit better teaching for their level of understanding. So that's kind of why we have switched it out and have just introduced it. So this morning, instead of watching the whole video, we're just going to watch the Bible story portion of our Story Lab.
Cool.
Super exciting.
So I would encourage us all lean in. So this is the Bible story of Esther, and then I'll come up after this story, after the video, and just kind of give us some points for us to take home. So check this video out.
Yeah.
The story before the story.
Today, we're in book 17 of the Old Testament, Esther. God made a plan to bless the whole world through Abraham's family, the Israelites.
But over and over, God's people would run to God and then pull away, back and forth, just like a yo-yo. At last, God allowed the Israelites to be captured by foreign nations, so they would understand they can only be happy close to God.
Even in captivity, though, some of these men and women still loved and honored God, like a girl named Esther and her cousin Mordecai, which is where our epic story begins.
Take it away!
Years before, the Jewish people had been captured and taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. But then, Babylon was conquered and became part of the Persian Empire, with Susa as its capital. So, Esther grew up in a land that was not her own. And when her parents died, her cousin, Mordecai, raised her as his own daughter.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Love him with all your strength.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart.
One day, a new king named Xerxes came to power in Persia. And this guy was a character. He threw a crazy wild party and then fired his own queen for refusing to show up. Not the kind of guy you want running your country. Anyhow, when he finally calmed down, he realized he didn't have a queen anymore, so he decided to look for a new one. After a long search through the entire kingdom, Xerxes chose Esther.
Cousin Mordecai, what do I do?
Don't tell anyone you're from a Jewish family.
We've already seen that Xerxes didn't bother to think much before making decisions, so he chose on a whim to promote an official named Haman to take charge of all the other nobles in the kingdom. Haman had a ginormous ego, and he loved making all the other officials outside the palace bow low to him. But Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman, and this made Haman so mad he about went through the roof. Haman was such a terrible guy that he decided not only to punish Mordecai, but every single Jew in the country. He went to King Xerxes with a terrible plan.
Your Majesty, these Jews live differently than everyone else. They don't obey your laws.
Who do they think they are?
I know, right? Give the order to destroy them.
Consider it done.
I can't even. Xerxes actually sent a letter all over the kingdom declaring that on the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews were to be killed. When Mordecai and the other Jews discovered this horrible news, they dressed in rough cloth and wept bitterly. Mordecai sent a message to Esther in the palace, telling her what Haman had done.
You must ask the king to save our people.
Esther was devastated. She sent a response to her cousin.
Tell him, no one can come before the king unless he sends for them. If I do it, I'll die, unless he reaches out his gold scepter to me.
Mordecai sent his answer right back.
You may not escape, even though you are queen. Who knows? It's possible you became queen for a time just like this.
Esther knew Mordecai was right. She sent him one more message.
Tell Mordecai, gather all the Jews. Don't eat anything for 3 days. I and my servants will fast too. Then I'll go to the king.
Esther faced a terrible dilemma, but she took 3 days to prepare her heart and her mind. Then she went to face the king. It must have taken every ounce of courage Esther had to step through those doors. And then she had to wait what felt like an eternity for the king to even notice her. At last, he looked up. Then he smiled and reached out his golden scepter.
What is it, Queen Esther? I'll give you anything up to half my kingdom.
Esther must have been shaking with relief. But instead of making her request right away, she asked the king to attend a special banquet along with Haman. The king was flattered and curious. At the banquet, he told her once more,
I'll give you anything up to half my kingdom.
I'd like you and Haman to come to another feast tomorrow. Then I'll answer your question.
What? The king was so intrigued, he agreed to come back again. The next night, he and Haman joined Esther at a second festive meal.
What do you want me to do for you? I'll give you up to half my kingdom.
Esther took a deep breath and put it all on the line.
Your Majesty, let me live. Please spare my people. We have been sold to be destroyed.
Who is the man who has dared to do such a thing?
Haman is the one.
Xerxes was so enraged that he had Haman killed. Then the king created a new order that would allow the Jews to be saved.
We will celebrate this day with great joy.
The end.
Wow, King Xerxes was kind of a loose cannon.
Exactly. There was no way to predict what he would do, but Esther leaned into God, and she took a big, courageous step, even though she had no idea what would happen.
So that's the story of Esther, the short form story of Esther, where Esther steps in and has this moment where she makes a decision ultimately to step in for God's people to be saved. Like, our life is made up of moments of decisions. In fact, we made tons of decisions even this morning. What should we wear? What should we eat? What should we not eat? When should we wake up? Should we press snooze one more time this morning? Anybody just gonna be honest and say, I hit the snooze button more than once this morning? Okay, me too. Yes, okay. Our life is full of decisions and moments. And some of those moments seem silly and trivial, like the snooze button. Other moments are massive. And I think this morning we have a chance to not miss these Esther moments. You see, Mordecai sends Esther this letter, and he uses these words for such a time as this. If you look at Esther, I know that we celebrate Esther, and we just talked about how bold and courageous she was, but to look at her story up to this point, there's not much courage built into this, and there's not that much that we hear about Esther beyond this point of her story in the Bible, but we hear her story here. She's not the most upstanding character in the Bible, and yet Esther is the person that God uses to preserve the family line that Jesus will one day come from. I think it's this reminder that God uses the most unlikely people to do incredible things and bring salvation to the most unlikely people as well. Esther was young, and she was a foreigner in the kingdom with a questionable past, and yet God brings salvation through her. What we see in the story of Esther is it really doesn't matter what our history is, and it doesn't matter what our ability is. It's our availability matters to God most. Like, it doesn't matter what our history is. It doesn't matter, like, where we've come from or the decisions we made to this point. And it doesn't matter how good we are, how talented we are. What matters to God is our availability. Are we willing to do what he calls us to do in these moments? But I will tell you this, that it will almost always involve risk. Much like, but even more so, standing on stage blindfolded to eat something that you have no idea what is about to be placed in your mouth. It will always involve risk. That's why in chapter 4, verse 13, here's what it says. It says, then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. So Mordecai and Esther are going back and forth. And he says, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. And so basically, your life could come to an end, just like the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. When we follow Jesus, it will always involve risk. I think that's why this word perish is in this story. And in fact, this word perish means to be destroyed. This word is used more in the story of Esther than in the entire first 5 books of the Bible put together. Perish. It's almost like this story of like behind and around every twist and turn, there is this imminent danger that is coming, that could come to Esther, that could come to the Jews, that could come to God's people. And so that's why he says, with perish, he says, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. So he's basically saying, hey, your life could come to an end. Your life could come to an end, Esther. It is that is what is on the line. Throughout the story of Esther, it feels like their lives and God's entire plan of redemption are hanging by a thread. There's no really safe places and no really safe people, but we do know that God's purposes will surely be accomplished. But what's certain is that God will deliver his people. Esther, you might die either way, so you might as well do what's right. You see, in our lives, I think safety is a myth. The risk, our lives are filled with vulnerability. We don't choose between safe and risk. What we actually choose is that we choose between a risk for God or a risk without him. I read this quote by a guy named John Piper, and he said this: risk is woven into the fabric of our lives. We cannot avoid risk even if we wanted to. So why not say like Esther, for the sake of Jesus, I will risk it. You see, our lives will always be full of risk. It's on everything that we do, and it has a part in everything that we do. So Esther bet her life on God's purposes and his plans. Esther stood for what was right, even when she wasn't sure what would happen next. That's why when Mordecai says, who knows, maybe it was for such a time as this. The question we have to ask ourselves, that if life is full of risk and safety is a myth, then what is our time as this right now? Like, what is yours? If we had to really look and ask this question, what is your time such as this? What is yours? What is God calling you to do? What is he asking you to do for for such a time as this, that only you can do, that only you've been placed where you are to do that. When we see this story of Esther, the entire story play out, what we understand is this, is that you have been placed for a purpose. You've been placed for a purpose. That's what for such a time as this means. You've been placed for a purpose. So God has placed you exactly where you are right now for a reason and for a purpose. God has placed you in the family you are in right now for a reason and for a purpose. He has placed you in the job that you are in right now, even if you hate it, for a reason or a purpose. Kids, God has placed you in the school that you are in, around the people that you are every day for a reason, for a purpose. The question is, will we listen to what He's placed us there for? He has placed so many of us in specific places for specific opportunities for His kingdom. And many of us are in a palace, like Esther was, with access to resources and influence. You have been divinely appointed to a place right now, to the people that in your life that need to know who Jesus is, to people that need to serve, that you need to serve. God has placed you in a space right now to invest in the next generation of students for the gospel. God, maybe for some of us, has given us financial resources for such a time as this to invest in what matters most. God has placed you where you are now to serve your family. This works for all of us. Esther's story is our story. That wherever you are, no matter whether you want to be there or not, God has placed you there for such a time as this. The question is, will we respond? You have been placed for a purpose, every single one. Kids, you have been placed in your home for a purpose, to encourage and obey your parents, to show them who Jesus is. Parents, you have been placed in your home for a purpose. And maybe you're such a time as this is just simply making the decision, hey, tonight and from every night forward, that we will sit down and we will pray as a family. Maybe for you, such a time as this is, hey, tomorrow when I go into work, and from every day forward when I go into work, I'm going to choose for the first 3 things that I do is to encourage somebody. 3 encouraging things that come out of my mouth before anything else I do for such a time as this. God has given us financial resources maybe to invest in someone's life or in something beyond Christmas for a reason. And maybe today it's us saying, hey, I'm going to do that. Maybe God has placed you in your marriage for a reason. You've been placed for a purpose. And today you make the decision, hey, we are going to read or we're going to pray every night. I don't know what it is, but the good thing is I don't have to come up with every anecdotal idea for you to know exactly why you've been placed where you are for a purpose. You know that. You know it right now. I know it right now. The question is, what will we do about it? And we find ourselves in the palace like Esther, being encouraged and hearing someone else say, who knows? Maybe God has placed you where you are for such a time as this. And the question is, Esther, or for each of us, what will we do? Will we respond? Will we bet our life on God's plans? Because we have been chosen, you have been chosen and blessed for something bigger. And if we don't grasp the bigger picture of what God's doing, then we'll miss our moment and potentially miss our purpose. And in those moments where there's something we know we should do and we're trying to gather the courage to do it, we remember Esther, who maybe doesn't have the most incredible past, but in that moment, she made a decision to do what was right. So we remember how she stood for what was right, even when she wasn't sure what would happen next.